Hi, I'm Ryan from Amber Elm. Today is all about tape loops, tape loops, tape loops, tape loops. I'm going to take you step by step on how to make shorter 4 or 5 second loops and longer loops that run outside the machine, and address some of the pitfalls that you may face when you're just getting started. Just a quick disclaimer, this video may seem a bit disjointed. It's on purpose, I promise. It'll all make sense in the end. Before I keep going, I'll address the elephant in the room. Yes, new hat. I have a new hat, and nothing else is different. When making tape loops, there are generally 3 ways to go about it. You can make these little 4 to 5 second loops, longer 10-second loops, and really long loops. Now, YouTube and the internet may have you believe that this is a really simple process that any beginner can just really easily do. Just pop open a cassette, cut it, measure it, splice it back together, and you're good to go. And those steps are accurate. It just may be not as easy and definitely not done without throwing out a few in the process. And it does get easier with practice, but I thought I'd go over some of the pitfalls and workarounds that I've encountered so far from one beginner to another. And later we'll cover some use cases for tape loops. So first, let's shoot for a 4 to 5 second-ish tape loop. For longer loops, all the same principles apply, just make longer cuts. You'll need a cassette, the kind with screws, a small screwdriver, scissors, tape, and if it's your first time, more patience than it takes trying to watch a toddler tie their shoes. The steps are really simple, but you'll encounter things like tape sticking everywhere but the tape you're trying to adhere it to.
Get off my hand.
Tape bunching up and not laying the right way, feeding it the right way back through the tape. So we'll try to get to all those. First, let's unscrew all the screws. You can toss these little branding labels. Now, remove the tape, but be careful not to lose these little pegs or this cog. You can cut the lead here and measure out about 5 inches of tape. Cut your length of tape, trying as best as you can to get a straight 90-degree cut. It's gonna make taping it back together a lot easier. Once it's cut, lay it out on the table. You see how it naturally has this curve? Well, that's the side that the sticky side of the tape is gonna go on. Get out your tape and scissors. Cut a small strip. Make sure the width of the tape is smaller than the tape itself, or get splicing tape, link in the description. Once you have the strip cut, grab the tape from one end. Remember that the curled side is where the sticky part of the tape goes. Try to make the tape as straight as possible. Grab the other end of the loop and tape it as closely and as straight as you can. The more space you have and the sloppier it is, the more gaps and pops you might get in your loop. Once you have your loop, it's time to put it back in the cassette. Make sure that the tape you use to splice it is facing out. Place the cog back on the right and feed the loop around the cog and around these little pegs, and finally through the front. And this is where I have the most trouble, so just patience. Once you have it run, put the top back on and screw it all back together. Before you put in all the effort in trying to figure out what you're going to play in your loop, make sure to put it in the cassette player and play it to make sure it's going around and not getting caught up on anything. And that all looks pretty simple. Tape loops are hard. So I did eventually get a nice tape loop going, and I thought about using editing to make it look like it wasn't as painstakingly brutal as it actually was, but I thought this would be more helpful. Watching people do things on YouTube can be fun, inspiring, and make you want to get up and try stuff. What you may not see is just what I showed you. Sometimes is really difficult, and sometimes you fail at it, and that's okay, but no one likes to upload videos about failed attempts at doing things. Like I said, eventually I got it working, but it wasn't without some serious patience and effort. Because I'm a beginner when it comes to tape loops, and it's fine. I'll get better at it, I'm sure. As I was struggling the filming of making the loop, it hit me that learning how to fail at new things was probably a more valuable video than another one explaining how to make tape loops. But I'll link those below. I just wanted to be transparent and honest about trying new things, and sometimes you do it and it's great, and sometimes you fail, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. The first few times I tried making a longer loop, it would just feed through all the way and stop. I'd throw away the loop and start over. And then I realized I just had to adjust the tension before it would play the loop. So yeah, before you toss out your loop and start completely over, play with the tension. Here are some things that you might want to consider. If it's too tight, it won't play. If it's too loose, it may warble too much or not play. Sounds fun, right? So you'll have to get the tension just right. And this is actually easier than it sounds. Once you have your loops, I find it really awesome to use a delay on them. It sort of smooths out any gaps, especially the gap that exists because of the erase head. You can make a workaround just by putting something over the erase head. Tape or foil could work, but If you don't want to go through that hassle, use a delay pedal that will play your loop through the gap. I also like using reverb, which is why I really like using the delverb pedal on my tape loops. It saves space and it's a really great pedal. I made a video about it here, so I won't rehash it. And now this is where a multi-track recorder comes in super handy. You can record different loops on each track and fade them in and out to create a really cool piece based on the loops. This is also a really great way to make ambient pads. I could also see this being used as like a cool break in a lo-fi track or really any style of music. Get creative with the tape speed. I like to record on the faster setting. I feel like loops are sort of like samples in the sense that if you pitch them down, they typically sound better. Also, another little tip for recording your loops, if you're using a multi-track recorder, I find it really helpful to only play like dyads instead of triads. I like using dyads just because if you're pitching them around, they can stay a little bit more harmonic than if you're using these really elaborate chords. If you try this, I'd love to hear what you come up with, and if you've made tape loops before and have any tips for some of the challenges, leave them in the comments so the community can get some extra information. Just as a reminder before I go, I did figure out how to host files on my website. I'll link it in the description. I'm adding another one. I made a couple patches for VCV Rack this week that I'll upload so you can listen to them and mess with them if you want. I'm just pretty excited to share them. So I'll keep working on these loops and I'm sure I'll learn more along the way. I'll share as I go. But that's all for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.